The steering wheel felt like a block of ice under my hands by the time I turned into my parents' driveway. Snow hammered against the windshield so hard that the wipers looked like they were losing an argument. My old Jeep groaned its way up the heated stone lane while every warning light that mattered stayed blessedly off. That was good enough for me. A blast of cold air slipped through the door's seal near my left shoulder. It stung my lungs every time I breathed. The kind of cold Colorado specializes in when it wants to remind you that nature always wins. Trapper lifted his head from the center console and looked at me. Just that. No barking, no whining, no dramatic movie dog behavior. He simply looked at me with those steady brown eyes that had carried me through more bad nights than I cared to count. I reached over and scratched behind his ear. Almost done, buddy. His tail thumped once against the passenger seat. 3 deployments as an Army combat medic had taught me something strange about exhaustion. Most people think being tired means wanting sleep. Real exhaustion is different. It's carrying things nobody can see. It's hearing sounds nobody else notices. It's walking into a crowded room and calculating exits before you notice the furniture. That kind stays with you. The massive Prescott estate emerged through the blowing snow. The house looked less like a home and more like a luxury ski resort that happened to belong to my parents. Warm lights glowed from enormous windows. A line of black SUVs sat near the entrance. Someone had paid a small fortune to keep the driveway perfectly clear despite the storm. That should have been my first clue. My mother had spent 3 weeks calling me. Your father misses you. The family should be together. It's time for a reunion. Normal parents usually didn't need 6 phone calls and 4 text messages to convince their daughter to visit. Still, I came. That was probably my second mistake. I parked beside a brand new Range Rover that cost more than my Jeep, my savings account, and possibly my liver. Trapper jumped down first. Snow immediately coated his black fur. He didn't care. We crossed the driveway together and climbed the wide stone steps. By the time I reached the front doors, my face felt half frozen. The oak doors swung open before I could knock. Warm air rushed over me. The contrast hit like a punch. Outside smelled like snow and pine trees. Inside smelled like expensive catering, vanilla candles and money. Lots of money. A woman carrying a tray of champagne glasses hurried past me without saying hello. 2 men in matching black suits adjusted lighting equipment near a staircase. Somebody was arranging white roses in crystal vases taller than a 5th grader. I stopped. This didn't look like a family reunion. This looked like an event. Trapper sat quietly beside me. At least one of us wasn't confused. My mother appeared from around a corner wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my first car. Oh good, you're here. She kissed the air somewhere near my cheek. Not my actual cheek. Close enough. You made good time. I drove through a blizzard. Yes. Well, that was the entire acknowledgement. Then her eyes moved past me. To Trapper. The smile weakened slightly. We'll talk in a minute, and she was gone again. A catering manager intercepted her halfway across the foyer and started discussing table placements. I stood there holding my duffel bag. Nobody offered to help. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked about the drive. Nobody asked about Trapper. Interesting. I heard heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor. Audrina. My younger sister looked exactly like someone launching a luxury fashion empire. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect posture, perfect smile. The kind of perfection that takes an entire support staff. Her smile lasted until she reached me. Then she noticed my boots. Snow covered them. Next, she noticed Trapper's service vest. Her expression collapsed completely. She looked at the dog, then at me, then back at the dog. You actually brought the animal? She kept her voice low, but not low enough. I glanced around. Good to see you too. I'm serious. So am I. Her eyes narrowed. This is an important weekend. Mom said it was a family reunion. It is. She said it so fast I almost laughed. Almost. Because behind her, I could see workers setting up branded display walls. One of them carried a sign that read, Audrina Winter Coction, Private Investor Preview Family Reunion. Sure, and I was the Queen of England. You couldn't leave him at home? She asked. I looked down at Trapper. He sat perfectly still, despite being surrounded by strangers. He goes where I go. Audrina sighed dramatically. Of course she did. Everything with Audrina was a performance. I just don't want problems tonight. Neither do I. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then a photographer walked through the foyer carrying camera equipment. Another clue. A pretty obvious one. Audrina forced a smile that never reached her eyes. Try not to draw attention to yourself." Then she walked away, just like that. I watched her disappear into the crowd. The funny thing was that nobody in my family had ever asked Trapper what he did for a living. If they had, they might have learned he had probably saved more lives than everyone in this house combined. Instead, they saw fur, they saw inconvenience, they saw something that didn't fit the picture. Trapper nudged my hand. I looked down. "Yes," I said quietly, "I noticed too." Because standing there in that giant beautiful house, surrounded by people who shared my last name, I felt less welcome than the catering staff. And the night had barely started. Have you ever walked into a room full of family and realized you were the only person who didn't belong there? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about dignity, resilience, and standing your ground when people underestimate you, remember our new stories premiere every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Make this channel part of your daily routine, and I'll see you at the next story. I tightened my grip on Trapper's leash and stepped farther into the house. The deeper I went, the less this place looked like a family gathering. Every room felt staged. Workers moved with the urgency of people who were being paid by the hour and monitored by the minute. White floral arrangements sat on nearly every flat surface. Portable lighting rigs had been hidden behind decorative pine displays. Someone was adjusting branded banners near the main staircase, while another crew polished wine glasses that already looked spotless. Nobody looked relaxed. That included my family. My father stood near the dining room speaking into his phone. "Move the investor packets to the west table." No, not that table. The other one. He ended the call and immediately started another. I hadn't seen him in almost 11 months. He didn't notice me standing 10 feet away. Or maybe he did. Sometimes those were the same thing. Trapper nudged my leg. "Yeah," I muttered, "I see it too." The family reunion had apparently invited a lighting consultant. A woman carrying a clipboard rushed past me. "Private investor presentations begin at 6:30. There it was. Confirmation. Not that I needed it. I wandered toward the living room and spotted a massive display featuring photographs of winter jackets, luxury ski apparel, and smiling models standing in snow that probably came from a machine. Across the top was a silver logo, a Aurora Summit. That was Audrina's company. At least now I knew why I had been summoned across 2 states and through a blizzard. I wasn't family, I was camouflage. A smiling photo in the background that helped create the illusion of a perfect family supporting a perfect daughter. The realization should have hurt. Instead, it felt familiar. I finally spotted my mother near a fireplace, directing 2 decorators who were arguing over candle placement. Apparently, the exact distance between candles could determine the fate of civilization. I walked toward her. "Mom," she turned. For a brief second, her face softened. I opened my arms for a hug. She immediately placed both hands on my shoulders and stopped me halfway. The smile stayed frozen on her face. The same smile people use when speaking to a customer whose coupon expired 3 months ago. "Jillian, sweetheart." There was tension behind every word. "Good to see you." "You too." Her eyes drifted toward Trapper, then toward the growing crowd, then back to me. "Listen, that word never leads anywhere good. Just stay out of the way tonight." I blinked. "What?" She lowered her voice. "Audrina has very important investors arriving." I stared at her. She continued. "And your condition." She hesitated long enough to make it worse. "Makes some people uncomfortable." The sentence landed harder than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. Trapper shifted closer against my leg. Mom glanced at him again. The irony almost made me laugh. The dog was doing a better job comforting me than my own mother. "I have PTSD, I said calmly. "I know, you say that like I brought bed bugs. Jillian, I'm serious," she sighed. Not a sad sigh, an irritated one. The kind people use when traffic adds 4 minutes to their commute. You know what I mean. Actually, I didn't. And that was the problem. 3 deployments. Hundreds of casualties treated. Years spent patching together strangers who never got the chance to thank me. Yet somehow my greatest social offense was existing in a room full of wealthy people. A waiter carrying champagne passed us. Mom immediately turned away. "Please don't make tonight difficult." Then she walked off before I could answer, just like that. Conversation over, decision made, case closed. I stood there for several seconds. One of Audrina's employees approached carrying garment bags. He glanced at me, then at Trapper, then back at me. "Service dog? Yeah, cool." And he kept walking. Funny how complete strangers often managed basic human decency without needing instructions. I followed a quiet hallway toward the back section of the house. The noise faded with every step. The polished marble floors gave way to older hardwood. Family photographs lined the walls. Most featured Audrina receiving an award, Audrina at a charity gala, Audrina cutting a ribbon, Audrina on the cover of a regional business magazine. I spotted exactly 3 photos that included me. One was from high school, one was from basic training, one had been taken nearly 8 years ago. At least I made the highlights reel. I found the guest room my mother had assigned me. It sat near the rear corner of the house, far from the event space, convenient, out of sight, out of the way. Mission accomplished. The room itself was nice enough. King-sized bed, stone fireplace, private bathroom, the kind of room people pay hundreds per night to rent. Yet somehow it felt colder than the snow outside. I set down my duffel bag. Trapper immediately jumped onto the rug beside the bed. I sat down and leaned forward. For several seconds, I buried my face in the thick fur around his neck. No speeches, no dramatic breakdown, just breathing. His heartbeat remained steady. Mine eventually followed. Outside the room, laughter drifted through the hallway. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne. A woman complimented the floral arrangements. Another guest talked excitedly about projected quarterly growth. The entire house seemed obsessed with appearances, investments, brand image, social status, everything polished, everything curated, everything carefully arranged, everything except the people. I rubbed Trapper's ear. You know what's funny, buddy? His tail tapped against the rug. If they put half this much effort into loving each other, we'd all be a lot less miserable. The tail tapped again. That counted as agreement. A burst of laughter echoed from downstairs, then another, then music. The party was beginning. And sitting alone in that guest room, listening to my family celebrate a version of reality they had manufactured for strangers, I started realizing something uncomfortable. The most expensive thing inside that house wasn't the furniture. It wasn't the artwork. It wasn't the event. It was the illusion everyone was desperately trying to protect. A deep vibration rolled through the floor beneath my boots and rattled the water glass on the nightstand. Then it happened again, and again. The party downstairs had officially stopped pretending to be a business gathering. The music had taken over. I sat on the edge of the bed while Trapper rested beside me on the rug. Through the floorboards, I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter, glasses clinking, and conversations that all sounded important to the people having them. The bass kept pulsing. Most people would have called it background music. My nervous system disagreed. The steady rhythm hit something buried deep inside my brain, a place I spent years trying to lock away. Every vibration felt familiar for all the wrong reasons. Not because it sounded exactly the same. Because trauma doesn't care about exact matches, it only needs reminders. The bass rolled through the floor again. My shoulders tightened. A memory flashed across my mind. Dust, smoke, radio chatter, rotor blades. I blinked hard and focused on the room, the fireplace, the dresser, the window, the bed. Safe. I was safe. The bass hit again. My chest disagreed. My heartbeat started climbing. Nothing dramatic, just enough. The way a car engine slowly creeps into higher RPMs. Trapper lifted his head immediately. He noticed before I did. That was one of the reasons he was so good at his job. He wasn't waiting for a crisis. He noticed the beginning. I rubbed my hands together. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt thinner. I hated that feeling. The frustration never completely goes away. You know you're safe. You know you're sitting inside a luxury mountain house and not inside a combat zone. You know the difference, yet part of your body never got the memo. Another burst of bass shook the floor. Trapper stood up. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the bed beside me and leaned his weight against my chest. 70 pounds of trained dog, solid, steady, reliable. Unlike most humans I had met recently, I wrapped one arm around him. His body heat helped, his breathing helped, the pressure helped. Everything his training was designed to do worked exactly as intended. Slowly, my breathing started matching his in, out. The room stopped shrinking, a little, not completely, but enough. I reached into my duffel bag and grabbed my medication bottle. One tablet left for the evening. I shook it into my palm, then realized my water glass was empty. Perfect. The timing couldn't have been better. I looked toward the door. The kitchen wasn't far, down the back hallway, past the service staircase. Less than 2 minutes each way, 3 at most. I scratched behind Trapper's ear. Stay. His ears perked up. Stay. He immediately settled back onto the bed. No hesitation, no argument, years of training, I stood. He remained exactly where he was. Good boy. The hallway outside felt busier than before. The event had clearly reached full speed. Guests moved through the house, carrying cocktails and champagne flutes. Several conversations stopped briefly when people noticed me. Not because I was important. Because I wasn't. I was the woman nobody could quite place. The family member hidden in the background. One man smiled politely. Another glanced away. A woman wearing enough diamonds to refinance a small home nearly bumped into me while talking about market expansion. Nobody mattered. I just needed water. The bass continued vibrating through the walls. I headed down the rear staircase. The sounds of the party softened with every step. The kitchen sat at the far end of the lower level. Unlike the glamorous rooms upstairs, this space actually looked useful. Staff moved efficiently between ovens and prep stations. Caterers carried trays loaded with appetizers I couldn't pronounce and probably wouldn't enjoy. One of the kitchen staff recognized Trapper's absence before anyone else would have. "Where's your partner tonight?" an older cook asked. I smiled slightly. "Taking a break upstairs." He nodded. "Smart dog." Smarter than most people here. That earned a laugh, a genuine one. For the first time all evening, somebody made eye contact with me without immediately evaluating my usefulness. Funny how that worked. I filled a glass with water, took my medication, finished half the glass. The digital clock above the refrigerator read 7:43. I remember noticing it because everything still felt manageable. Not perfect, manageable. The cook pointed toward a tray. "Take a sandwich. I'm good. You look like you haven't eaten." "I've eaten." He raised an eyebrow. "Something besides gas station coffee?" I smiled despite myself. "Fair point." He handed me half a turkey sandwich. I accepted. For about 10 seconds, the evening almost felt normal. Then I heard Audrina's voice somewhere above us. Not the words, just the voice. Sharp, impatient, performing. The kitchen staff immediately returned to work. I set down the empty glass. "Thanks." The cook nodded. "Good luck." That was an unusual thing to say. At the time, I thought he meant surviving the party. Looking back, I think he knew something about this family that I was still trying to ignore. I headed back toward the staircase. One flight up, one hallway, one guest room, 3 minutes, maybe less. That was all. The music seemed louder as I climbed. The bass continued hammering through the walls. Guests laughed somewhere nearby. Champagne glasses clinked. Audrina's perfect event carried on exactly as planned. I turned down the hallway toward my room. Something felt wrong immediately. I couldn't explain it. The kind of feeling you get when you walk into a house and realize someone moved the furniture. Everything appears normal, but it isn't. My pace quickened. The guest room door came into view. I stopped. The door was open. I knew I had closed it. Trapper never ignored a stay command. Never. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The room looked empty from the hallway, and for the first time all night, the bass downstairs wasn't the loudest thing I could hear. My heartbeat was. The water glass slipped from my hand before I even realized my fingers had let go. It hit the hardwood floor and exploded. The sound cracked through the hallway. I didn't look down. I didn't care. My eyes were locked on the room. The bed was empty. The blanket was rumpled. One pillow had fallen onto the floor. Trapper wasn't there. For a second, my brain refused to process it. Maybe he moved. Maybe he heard something. Maybe he followed a staff member. Maybe, no. Trapper didn't break commands, especially not stay, not after years of training, not after everything we'd been through. A cold rush shot through my body so fast it made the earlier panic attack feel insignificant. People talk about fear. Most have no idea what it actually feels like. Fear isn't screaming. Fear isn't drama. Fear is your body instantly calculating every possible disaster before your mind can stop it. I crossed the room in 2 strides. Bathroom, empty. Closet, empty. Under the desk, nothing. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Trapper, no response. I rushed into the hallway. Trapper! A woman carrying folded towels jumped. I barely noticed. The hallway seemed suddenly endless. My legs were already moving before I consciously decided to run. The bass from downstairs pounded through the house. The party continued. Champagne, music, laughter. Somewhere in the middle of all that nonsense, my dog had vanished. I took the stairs 2 at a time. Guests turned as I pushed through the crowd. A man in a tailored suit stepped sideways to avoid being knocked over. A woman holding a martini gave me an irritated look. "Sorry for interrupting your luxury networking event. My dog might be dying." The living room was packed. At least 60 people, maybe more. Investors, business partners, socialites. People who used words like brand synergy without laughing. I scanned the room, no trapper. I moved toward the back section of the house, still nothing. Then I heard Audrina. Of course. She stood near the mudroom entrance, beside a decorative mirror taller than I was. A makeup artist hovered nearby while Audrina inspected her reflection. Even now, even during her own event, still checking herself. I walked straight toward her. Where's my dog? She looked at me through the mirror, annoyed, not concerned, not confused. Annoyed. What? Where is Trapper? The makeup artist immediately backed away, smart woman. Audrina rolled her eyes, actually rolled them. Like I was asking about a missing sweater. Oh my God, my stomach dropped. People don't react like that unless they already know the answer. What did you do? Relax. That word should be illegal. Nobody in history has ever relaxed because someone told them to. Audrina, he was pacing around your room. My heartbeat accelerated. He wasn't pacing. He was. He was trained to stay. She shrugged. A literal shrug. Whatever. My hands started shaking. Something else. He was whining. He alerts. He was annoying. There it was. The truth. Not concern. Not misunderstanding. Annoyance. A living creature had inconvenienced her. My voice dropped. What did you do? Audrina checked her lipstick in the mirror. Then she answered, casually, like she was discussing furniture placement. I put him outside. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I stared at her. She kept talking. He was ruining the aesthetic. The aesthetic, that was the word she chose. Not event, not guests, not safety, not concern. The aesthetic. The dog who had helped keep me alive for years apparently didn't fit the visual theme. I couldn't speak. For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak. Audrina sighed dramatically. Don't look at me like that. Outside? He'll be fuss-eyed. He probably found somewhere to hide. My voice sounded strange, far away. Where? The garage, maybe. I looked toward the mudroom, toward the back entrance, toward the electronic security panel mounted beside the door. A red light flashed steadily, locked. My eyes stayed on it. Then I looked back at Audrina. The garage isn't connected to the backyard. What? The garage, I pointed. The garage isn't accessible from outside. Confusion briefly crossed her face, then irritation returned. I don't know. No, she didn't know. That was the problem. She didn't know because she hadn't cared enough to check. I walked toward the door. Every instinct I possessed was screaming now. The electronic lock continued flashing red, locked, sealed, secure. Inside the house, the temperature was comfortable. Outside, it was a different world. The weather report I'd heard before arriving flashed through my mind. -10 degrees, wind gusts over 40 miles per hour, heavy snow, near whiteout conditions. I looked through the narrow glass panel beside the door. Nothing but swirling white, no visibility, no movement, no trapper. The bass from the party continued thumping behind me. The contrast felt insane. A luxury launch event on one side of the door, a deadly blizzard on the other. I turned back toward Audrina. For the first time, she seemed slightly uncomfortable, not guilty. Not just uncomfortable. Because people nearby had started listening. What? She snapped. I stared at her, really stared at her. And suddenly, every ugly moment from the evenings snapped into focus. The fake family reunion, the avoidance, the embarrassment. The way everyone treated Trapper like a stain on expensive carpet. The way my mother wanted me hidden upstairs. The way my father acted like I wasn't there. The way Audrina viewed everything through the lens of appearance. She hadn't just removed my service dog. She hadn't just ignored my medical needs. She hadn't just broken trust. She had taken the one living thing in that house who cared whether I made it through the night. And she had thrown him into a blizzard. For decoration, the realization landed with terrifying clarity. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't a mistake. It was cruelty, pure and simple. The kind that dresses itself in expensive clothes and calls itself sophistication. My hand slammed onto the unlock button. The electronic lock clicked. A violent gust immediately rattled the door from the outside. Snow struck the glass like handfuls of gravel. Several guests jumped. Someone asked what was happening. I didn't answer. I grabbed the handle. Because at that moment, nothing inside that house mattered anymore. Not the investors, not the party. Not Audrina, not my parents, not the family name, only Trapper. I shoved the door open and stepped straight into the storm. The wind hit me so hard it nearly knocked me backward. Snow exploded into the house behind me. I heard people shouting. Someone screamed about the floor. Someone else yelled to close the door. I didn't care. The blizzard swallowed everything within 3 steps. The shoveled patio disappeared behind a wall of blowing snow. The decorative lights wrapped around the trees looked like faint stars buried inside a cloud. Even the house itself seemed to fade the farther I moved away. I wasn't wearing a coat. I wasn't wearing gloves. I wasn't thinking. Trapper! The wind ripped the name apart before it traveled 10 feet. I pushed forward. Snow immediately climbed past my knees. Another step. Then another. The drifts got deeper. The freezing air burned every breath before it reached my lungs. Tears formed instantly at the corners of my eyes and froze against my skin. Trapper! Nothing. Just wind. The kind of wind that sounds alive. I kept moving. The backyard stretched toward a tree line about 80 yards from the house. During summer, it probably looked beautiful. Tonight, it looked like the edge of the world. I pulled out my phone. No flashlight. Dead battery, of course. The cold had drained it. Perfect timing. I laughed once. A short, bitter sound. The kind that isn't really laughter. Behind me, the warm glow from the house looked unreal. A luxury launch party. Champagne. Designer clothing. Investors discussing 7-figure projections. And out here, a military service dog was freezing to death because he didn't match the decorations. That thought hit harder than the wind. I had spent years believing my family simply didn't understand me. That had been easier. Easier than admitting they understood exactly enough to know what mattered to me, and ignored it anyway. My boots sank deeper. The snow reached my thighs in some places. Every step became work. Every breath became work. Everything became work. Trapper. I stopped. Listened. Nothing. For a moment, real fear settled in. Not panic. Something colder. The possibility that I was too late. The possibility that while investors sampled imported appetizers, the one creature who never abandoned me was dying alone in the dark. I refused to accept it. I kept moving. A memory flashed through my head. Kandahar. Heat instead of snow. Dust instead of ice. Trapper weaving through debris after an explosion. Finding survivors before anyone else. Working until his paws bled. Never quitting. Never slowing down. Never asking why. The dog who had pulled people out of hell deserved better than this. I climbed through another drift. The wind shifted. For one brief second, visibility improved. Not much, just enough. Something caught my eye near the trees. A flash, small, reflective, gone. I froze, then saw it again. 20 yards ahead. Low to the ground, reflective fabric. My heart stopped, then started racing. Trapper! I stumbled forward, fell to one knee, got back up, ran, or as close to running as a person can manage in waist-deep snow. The reflective strip became clearer. Then I saw him. Curled tightly beside a cluster of frozen pines, motionless, covered in snow. For one horrifying second, I thought he was dead. My legs nearly gave out. I dropped beside him. Trapper! His body trembled. A small movement, tiny, but enough. Relief hit so hard it physically hurt. Oh God. I brushed snow away from his face. Ice coated his fur. Ice coated his whiskers. Ice had formed around the corners of his eyes. His entire body shook violently. Not barking, not whining, just trying to survive. The sight shattered something inside me. This dog had followed me through years of nightmares. Sat beside hospital beds. Stayed awake during panic attacks. Pulled me back when my mind wandered into places I couldn't escape alone. And somebody had thrown him away like unwanted furniture. I ripped off my sweater. The freezing air instantly bit into my skin. I didn't care. I wrapped the sweater around him, pulled him against me. His body felt terrifyingly cold. Far colder than it should have. Come on, buddy. My voice broke. Come on. He weakly lifted his head, just enough to press his nose against my neck. That tiny movement almost destroyed me, because even now, after everything, he was trying to comfort me, not the other way around. I wrapped both arms around him and pulled him tighter. The snow soaked through my shirt. The wind cut across my bare skin. None of it mattered. For several seconds, I simply sat there holding him. The storm howled around us. The darkness pressed in from every side. And all I could think about was the difference between loyalty and blood. People spend their entire lives insisting family is everything. Family first, family forever. Family above all. Funny. The most loyal member of my family wasn't even human. A fresh wave of anger rose inside me. Not hot anger, cold anger, the kind that settles deep, the kind that doesn't fade. The kind that changes things permanently. Because this wasn't an accident. Audrina didn't accidentally leave a door open. She didn't accidentally forget he was outside. She made a decision. My parents created the environment where that decision felt acceptable. And now I was kneeling in a blizzard, trying to keep a freezing dog alive because maintaining an aesthetic mattered more than basic decency. Something ended in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically. No speech, no announcement. Just a quiet certainty settling into place. The family tie was gone. I slid one arm beneath Trapper's chest and another beneath his hind legs. 70 pounds, normally manageable. Tonight he felt twice that. My muscles protested immediately. I ignored them. Let's go home. His tail moved once beneath the sweater, a weak thump. But it was there I stood, turned toward the distant glow of the house, and started carrying him through the storm. I shifted Trapper higher against my chest and kept walking. The back entrance sat much closer, 10 times easier, 10 times faster. I ignored it completely. For the first time that night, I wasn't interested in making things convenient for anyone. Snow whipped across my face as I crossed the front lawn. The sweater wrapped around Trapper was soaked through. His body still trembled against mine. Every few seconds I checked his breathing. Still there, Suzum QTV.txt, Viet Huan Ching Fun Tip Theo, 700-902. Still fighting. Good. The grand front entrance glowed through the storm like something out of a luxury real estate brochure. 40-foot windows. Imported stone. Custom iron lanterns. Everything designed to impress people who already had too much money. I climbed the steps. My arms burned. My legs ached. My shirt was plastered to my skin. The freezing air had turned my fingers almost numb. None of it mattered. The double doors stood directly ahead. I could already hear the music, the bass, the laughter, the party. The same party that never paused while a dog froze outside. That thought settled something inside me. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the explosive sense. The anger had burned away during the walk back. What remained was clarity. I kicked the door open. The impact slammed one door against the wall. Music flooded out. Warm air hit my face. Conversation stopped. Every head turned. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire room froze. I must have looked insane. Snow covered my hair. My jeans were soaked nearly to the waist. My face hurt from the cold. I wore only a thin t-shirt, and in my arms was a trembling black dog, wrapped in a drenched sweater. The contrast was absurd. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, luxury investors, and me, a half-frozen veteran carrying a freezing dog through the center of the room. I stepped forward. The music kept playing for another 3 seconds. Then someone near the DJ booth killed it. Silence crashed over the room. I walked straight through the middle of the event. Not around it, through it. Guests parted automatically, the same way people move aside for ambulances. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone understood it was serious. Melted snow dripped onto expensive flooring. Nobody stopped me. A woman lowered her champagne glass. A man removed his glasses. Several investors exchanged confused looks. Good, let them look. Let them see. I had spent years being hidden. Not tonight. Trapper let out a weak sound against my shoulder. That noise finally broke the paralysis gripping the room. Audrina appeared near the center display. Her expression went from confusion to horror. Not because of Trapper, not because of me. Because of the event, because of appearances. Because people were watching. Her face flushed bright red. She rushed toward me insane. There it was, the real Audrina. No investor smile, no media smile, no entrepreneur smile, just Audrina. Raw and ugly. Guests looked back and forth between us. I stopped walking. She pointed directly at Trapper. Get that filthy mud out of here! Several people visibly flinched. Good, let them hear it. Audrina, you are ruining everything. The words echoed through the room. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. She kept going. Months of image management were collapsing in real time. You couldn't stand being ignored for one night? Interesting accusation. Coming from the woman who threw a dog into a blizzard. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in years, I didn't see my little sister. I saw a stranger. A stranger willing to risk a living creature's life because it didn't fit her visual branding. The realization didn't hurt anymore. That surprised me. Maybe because the hurt had already happened. Now there was only recognition. Audrina noticed the crowd watching, too late. Her voice softened slightly, a desperate attempt to regain control. You're making a scene. I almost laughed, almost. Before I could answer, my parents finally arrived. Celeste reached me first, Donovan close behind. Both looked horrified. Not horrified about Trapper, not horrified about the blizzard, not horrified about what had happened, horrified about the audience. The priorities remained remarkably consistent. Jillian, my mother hissed, "What are you doing?" I stared at her. Then looked down at the dog, shaking in my arms. then looked back at her. The answer seemed pretty obvious. Donovan stepped closer. His voice carried the tone people use with unstable explosives. Let's go somewhere private. Private, of course. Always private. Hide the problem, manage the optics, protect appearances. The Prescott family motto. My mother forced a smile toward the guests. I'm so sorry. Nobody responded. That should have warned her. She continued anyway. My daughter has been struggling. There it was, the explanation, the excuse, the convenient narrative. Not what happened, not why. Just enough information to make me the problem. Mom, she's dealing with some issues. The room remained silent. Please excuse her behavior. Behavior. Interesting choice of words. Not concern, not emergency. Behavior. She reached for my arm. I pulled away, immediately. The movement wasn't aggressive, just final. Something about that seemed to unsettle her. Donovan stepped forward again. Jillian, let's not do this. I looked around the room, dozens of faces, investors, executives, guests, every one of them watching. For the first time all evening, nobody seemed interested in the floral arrangements. Then the crowd near the floor-to-ceiling windows shifted. Just slightly, a subtle movement. The kind powerful people create without trying. Someone stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, perfectly tailored suit, a glass of scotch resting casually in one hand. He hadn't spoken all night, he hadn't needed to. The room adjusted around him automatically. That kind of authority can't be purchased. It has to be earned. My father stopped talking, my mother stopped moving. Even Audrina went quiet. The man took a slow step forward, then another. His eyes moved from me to Trapper to the military service vest, barely visible beneath the soaked sweater. Something changed in his expression. Recognition, real recognition, not social recognition. Not celebrity recognition, something deeper. The room held its breath. And for the first time that night, I realized we had an audience Audrina never saw coming. Elias Montgomery had been watching. The silence stretched so long that I could hear melted snow dripping from my jeans onto the hardwood floor. Elias Montgomery kept walking. Slowly, deliberately, the room moved out of his way without being asked. People who had spent their entire careers trying to impress powerful men suddenly looked nervous. Audrina recovered first. Of course she did. She had spent years studying wealthy people the way biologists study rare animals. The moment she recognized an opportunity, she stepped forward with her polished investor smile. Mr. Montgomery, her voice transformed instantly. Warm, professional, charming. The voice disappeared whenever service workers entered a room. I am so sorry about this. She gestured vaguely toward me. My sister has some psychological issues and… Elias Montgomery walked right past her. Didn't pause, didn't acknowledge her, didn't even glance in her direction. The dismissal was so complete it almost felt surgical. Audrina froze. Several guests noticed. That was the first crack, the first real one. My mother stepped forward next. My daughter is struggling with… He ignored her too. My father opened his mouth. Nothing. Ignored. 3 people who had spent years controlling every room they entered suddenly found themselves invisible. Interesting. The general stopped directly in front of me. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade. Time had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, but the presence remained exactly the same. Some people enter a room, others occupy it. Elias Montgomery occupied it. His gaze moved over me carefully. The soaked shirt, the shaking hands, the snow clinging to my hair. Then he looked down at Trapper. His eyes settled on the service vest beneath the soaked sweater. The room held its breath. Nobody knew what was happening. I did. At least I thought I did. Then his eyes met mine, and suddenly I wasn't standing in a Colorado mansion anymore. I was back overseas, back in dust and heat, back in places where decisions mattered, back in places where people either came home or didn't. Sergeant Prescott. His voice cut through the room, calm, controlled, absolute. Every conversation died instantly. My throat tightened. Nobody had called me that in years. Not like that. Not with respect, not with memory, not with recognition. Sir. He looked down at Trapper again, then back at me. Is this the K-9 that pulled 3 of my medics out of the rubble in Kandahar? The room became perfectly still. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Of all the memories, of all the missions, of all the things he could have remembered. He remembered that. I swallowed. Yes, General. The word hit the room like an explosion. General. I saw it happen. The investors, the guests, the executives, the realization spreading across their faces. This wasn't some random wealthy businessman. This wasn't another investor. This was a retired 4-star general. The kind of man people spent entire careers trying to impress. Audrina's face lost all color. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely afraid. Not embarrassed, afraid. Because suddenly the story she had been telling everyone about me no longer worked. The unstable sister, the awkward family member, the embarrassment hidden upstairs. That version of reality was collapsing. Elias looked at Trapper again. Then something happened that nobody expected, including me. The general slowly lowered himself to one knee, right there. In the middle of the room, custom-tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, melting snow everywhere, he didn't care. A few guests exchanged stunned looks. One investor nearly dropped his drink. Elias gently lifted one of Trapper's paws, carefully, like handling something valuable, because he was. His expression darkened immediately. The pads were pale, too cold. He checked another paw, then another. Trapper weakly lifted his head. The general scratched behind his ear. Good dog. His voice softened slightly. Just slightly. Trapper's tail moved once. That tiny movement seemed to affect Elias more than he wanted anyone to know. He stood. Slowly. Then he turned. Toward Audrina. Toward my parents. Toward the room. Every eye followed him. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I watched this woman and this dog save American lives. Silence. I watched them work under conditions most people in this room couldn't imagine. More silence. I watched them run toward danger while others ran away from it. A woman near the fireplace lowered her eyes. A man beside her stared into his drink. The room suddenly felt much smaller, much less comfortable. Elias looked directly at Audrina, not angrily. That would have been easier. This was worse. Disappointment. The kind that leaves permanent marks. You threw a decorated veteran into a blizzard because he didn't match your decor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because there was nothing to say. No clever response, no stranding strategy, no public relations solution. Just truth. Simple, clean, unavoidable. Audrina finally found her voice. It's not like that. Wrong answer. Elias didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he reached over and placed his glass of scotch onto a passing server's silver tray. The gesture looked casual. It wasn't. Everyone felt it. The decision had already been made. He looked at her one final time. I do not invest my money, a pause, or my name, another pause, in people who lack basic human soul. The sentence landed harder than shouting ever could. Audrina stood frozen, her entire future balanced on what came next. Years of networking, years of planning, years of chasing approval, all waiting on one man's decision. Elias delivered it without hesitation. Your funding is denied. No dramatic speech, no grand gesture. Just 6 words. That was all it took. Because everyone in the room understood exactly what they meant. And judging by the expression spreading across the faces of the other investors, Elias Boss Montgomery wasn't the only person making a decision tonight. Nobody argued. That was the strange part. I expected excuses. I expected outrage. I expected my mother to rush into damage control mode, and my father to start negotiating reality the way wealthy people negotiate contracts. None of that happened. The room simply went quiet. The kind of silence that arrives when everyone realizes the truth has already won. Audrina stood frozen. For several seconds, she looked like someone waiting for a punchline that never came. This is ridiculous. Her voice sounded smaller now. Nobody answered. She looked toward the investors, toward the people she had spent months entertaining, months impressing, months chasing. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Nothing. One investor glanced away. Another checked his watch. A third quietly placed his untouched drink on a nearby table. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. People weren't evaluating her business anymore. They were evaluating her character. And that calculation was going badly, very badly. Elias Montgomery said nothing further. He didn't need to. A 4-star general doesn't usually repeat himself. His opinion had already become the center of gravity in the room. One by one, investors began stepping back. A woman near the fireplace picked up her coat. A man who had spent most of the evening praising Audrina's vision quietly exchanged business cards with someone else and headed toward the exit. Another investor approached the catering table instead of the presentation displays. The message was clear. The meeting was over. The funding conversation was over. The dream was over. Audrina noticed it too. Panic finally appeared. Real panic. Not performative panic. Not social embarrassment, the genuine kind. Wait. She moved toward a group of investors. I can explain. Nobody stopped. One man offered a polite nod, then continued walking. Another murmured something about an early flight. A third simply avoided eye contact entirely. That hurt her more than an argument ever could. Across the room, my father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His shoulders slumped. His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, Donovan Prescott had no speech, no solution, no strategy. My mother stared at the departing guests as though refusing to believe what she was seeing. The reality they had built together was collapsing in front of them. Not because of me, not because of Trapper, because eventually people reveal who they are, and eventually someone important notices. The funny thing was that I didn't feel victorious. I thought I might. I thought seeing Audrina Final's face consequences would bring satisfaction. It didn't. Mostly, I felt tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones, because winning isn't always exciting. Sometimes winning is simply surviving long enough for the truth to arrive. Trapper shifted slightly in my arms. His body felt warmer now, not fully recovered, but better. His breathing had become steadier. That mattered more than anything else happening in the room. Elias stepped closer. "There's a veterinarian about 20 minutes down the mountain," he said quietly. I nodded. "I'll take him. He should be fine." The reassurance meant more than I expected. "Thank you, sir." His expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Sergeant." Those words hit harder than I wanted them to, because respect sounds different when it's genuine. Across the room, Audrey's voice continued rising. "No, wait." Another investor was leaving. Then another. Then another. Nobody looked angry. That was the devastating part. They simply looked finished. The decision had already been made. I glanced toward my parents. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. Maybe they'd apologize. Maybe they'd finally understand. Maybe they'd see me. Instead, they looked shocked that consequences existed. My mother took a tentative step forward. "Jillian." I waited. Nothing meaningful came after that. Just my name. As if the right collection of words might still save the situation. My father cleared his throat. "We should talk." Another sentence I had heard my entire life. Usually right before nothing changed. I looked at them. Really looked at them. Not through the lens of hope, not through the lens of obligation, just honestly. And for the first time, I understood something. They weren't cruel in the dramatic way movies portray cruelty. They never screamed. They never hit. They never disowned me. What they did was quieter. They chose comfort over courage, image over truth, convenience over loyalty, again and again, year after year. That kind of damage leaves fewer bruises, but it lasts longer. I adjusted the sweater around Trapper. Then I looked at my family one final time. Audrina, Celeste, Donovan. 3 people I had spent years trying to earn love from. 3 people who never understood they already had it. I spoke calmly, no anger, no yelling, no speech. Just the truth. "You didn't just lock him out." The room remained silent. "You locked me out." My mother's face crumpled. For the first time all evening, she seemed to understand where this was going. I continued. "And I'm never knocking again." Nobody responded. There wasn't anything left to say. I turned toward the entrance. The same grand doors I had walked through earlier, hoping for a family reunion. Funny. I had finally found clarity instead. Elias Montgomery reached the doors before I did. He opened one side and held it there. No ceremony. No performance. Just respect. The kind my own family never managed to learn. As I passed him, he gave the small nod. I returned it. Nothing more was needed. The storm still waited outside. But somehow it felt less cold now. The drive down the mountain was quiet. The heater blasted warm air across the cab. Snow swirled through the headlights. The road curved through dark pines and frozen ridges. Trapper lay beside me with his head resting against my leg. His breathing was slow, steady, safe. Every few minutes I reached down and scratched behind his ear. His tail tapped softly against the seat. That sound mattered more than every conversation inside that mansion. The farther I drove, the smaller the estate became in my rearview mirror. Eventually it disappeared entirely. I didn't miss it. Because dignity isn't forcing people to respect you. It isn't winning arguments. It isn't making someone finally understand your worth. Dignity is recognizing your worth yourself. It's protecting what matters. It's carrying the things worth carrying. And sometimes, it's having the courage to leave everything else behind in the cold. Trapper sighed and settled closer against my side. For the first time all night, I smiled. Then I kept driving. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and followed the narrow mountain road through the darkness. The storm was still raging. Snow swept across the headlights in long white streaks. The heater blasted warm air into the cab. Every few seconds, I glanced over at Trapper. He was asleep, really asleep, not alert, not working, not watching me, just sleeping. That alone told me he was finally okay. For the first time all night, neither of us was fighting something. And that's when the thinking started. Funny how that works. When you're in the middle of a crisis, you don't have time to analyze anything. You just react. You do whatever needs to be done. The questions usually show up later. Somewhere on that mountain road, I started asking myself one of the hardest questions I'd ever faced. Why had I stayed so long? Not at the party. Not in the house. In the relationship. Why had I spent so many years trying to earn something that should have been freely given? I think a lot of people do that. Maybe more than we realize. We spend years trying to become acceptable to people who made up their minds about us a long time ago. We work harder, we become more successful, we become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, more accommodating. We keep thinking that if we just do enough, eventually they'll see our value. Eventually they'll appreciate us. Eventually they'll love us the way we deserve to be loved. The problem is that sometimes the finish line doesn't exist. You're running a race nobody intends to let you win. That realization took me years. My family wasn't waiting for me to prove myself. I had already done that. The military proved that. My service proved that. My life proved that. The problem wasn't a lack of evidence. The problem was that evidence wasn't what they were looking for. They wanted convenience, comfort, predictability. And whenever reality challenged those things, reality became the problem, including me. I thought about something Audrina said earlier that night. She told me I was ruining everything. At first I thought she was talking about the event. Later I realized she meant something much bigger. People like Audrina build entire worlds around appearances. Everything has a place. Everything serves a purpose. Everything contributes to the image, and people who don't fit the image become threats. Not because they're bad, because they're real. Real life is messy. Real people have scars. Real people struggle. Real people need support. That's hard to photograph. It's much easier to post pictures of perfect vacations and successful businesses than it is to show compassion when nobody is watching. The road curved sharply. I slowed down and adjusted my grip on the wheel. Trapper shifted slightly but didn't wake up. I smiled. Then I thought about another lesson that took me far too long to learn. There's a difference between being loved and being tolerated. That sounds obvious. It isn't. People who tolerate you often look a lot like people who love you. They invite you to holidays. They call occasionally. They remember your birthday. They might even say all the right things. The difference shows up when loving you becomes inconvenient. That's when you find out what's real. When you're struggling. When you're sick. When you're grieving. When you need help. When helping you costs them something. That's where the truth usually lives. And sometimes the truth hurts. Not because people hate you. Because they simply value other things more. I know some of you listening right now understand exactly what I mean. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's a spouse. Maybe it's a friend you've known for 20 years. You've spent so much time trying to preserve the relationship that you stopped paying attention to what the relationship was doing to you. That's dangerous. Because little wounds add up. 1,000 small dismissals can hurt more than one big betrayal. Being constantly overlooked changes people. Being constantly minimized changes people. Being constantly told that your needs are too much eventually teaches you to stop asking for anything at all. I did that for years. A lot of veterans do. A lot of survivors do. A lot of good people do. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this. You do not have to earn basic human respect. You do not have to audition for love. You do not have to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. The right people won't require that. The right people won't ask you to apologize for existing. The right people won't treat your pain like an inconvenience. Outside, the storm continued pounding against the Jeep. Inside, it felt strangely peaceful. Maybe because I finally stopped trying to solve a problem that wasn't mine to solve. My family spent years showing me who they were. I just kept hoping they'd become someone else. That's not loyalty. That's wishful thinking. And wishful thinking can keep you trapped longer than almost anything. I looked over at Trapper again. His head rested against the seat. His breathing was steady, content, safe. That dog never once asked me to become somebody different. He never cared about my career, my income, my reputation, my mistakes. He never expected me to perform. He just showed up every single day. And honestly, that's when I realized something. Loyalty isn't measured by who stands beside you when life is easy. It's measured by who remains when there's absolutely nothing to gain. Some people spend their entire lives searching for that kind of loyalty. That night, I was lucky enough to have it riding beside me. I stopped for gas about halfway down the mountain. The storm had weakened by then. Not much. Just enough that I could see the gas station sign before I was practically underneath it. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a mountain town gas station after midnight. A couple pickup trucks, a tired cashier, coffee that had probably been sitting there longer than some marriages. I topped off the Jeep, bought a bottle of water, and checked on Trapper. He was awake now, still tired, still recovering, but awake. His tail tapped against the seat when he saw me. That was all I needed. By the time I got back on the road, my phone had finally started receiving messages. The screen lit up, then lit up again, and again. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. My family had suddenly become very interested in talking. Funny how that happens. People ignore you for years, then panic the moment you stop participating. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. At least not anymore. I was thinking about something that people misunderstand all the time. Forgiveness. For years, I thought forgiveness meant fixing things. Maybe you were taught that too. A lot of us were. We grow up hearing phrases like, family is family, life is too short, you need to forgive and move on. Sounds nice. Makes a great quote for a greeting card. Real life is a little more complicated. One of the biggest lessons I learned after that night was that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. In fact, they're completely different things. You can forgive someone and still decide they shouldn't have unrestricted access to your life. You can forgive someone and still decide not to trust them. You can forgive someone and still choose distance. Those ideas make some people uncomfortable, especially people who benefit from having unlimited access to you. I thought about a conversation I once had with another veteran years ago. He told me something I've never forgotten. If somebody keeps setting your house on fire, forgiving them doesn't mean handing them the keys to your next house. At the time, I laughed. Now I understand exactly what he meant. A lot of people confuse forgiveness with permission. Those are not the same thing. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Permission is something you give someone else. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop giving permission. I know some people listening right now are probably struggling with that idea. Maybe you've spent years trying to keep peace in your family. Maybe you've become the person who always apologizes first, the person who always compromises, the person who always takes responsibility for everyone else's emotions. Eventually, that becomes exhausting, because you're carrying weight that doesn't belong to you. One of the most important things I learned after leaving that mountain house was how to recognize healthy boundaries. Healthy people usually respect them. Unhealthy people usually fight them. Think about that for a second. When you tell a reasonable person what you need, they may not love it, but they usually respect it. When you tell a selfish person what you need, they often treat it like an attack. Suddenly you're selfish. Suddenly you're difficult. Suddenly you're causing drama. Not because your boundary is unreasonable, because your boundary limits their control. That's a very different problem. I started noticing patterns, not just in my own family, everywhere. People who only called when they needed something. People who expected endless forgiveness but never accepted responsibility. People who demanded understanding while offering none. People who said things like, "Why can't you just let it go?" but somehow never asked, "What can I do to make it right?" There's a difference, a huge difference. One is accountability, the other is convenience. And convenience is often disguised as reconciliation. The road continued winding through the mountains. Traffic was almost non-existent. The world felt quiet. For the first time in years, my future felt quiet too. Not empty, peaceful. There's a difference. For a long time, I thought cutting back contact with certain people would feel lonely. It didn't. What actually felt lonely was spending years surrounded by people who never truly saw me. That realization surprised me. You can sit at a crowded holiday table and feel completely alone. You can also sit in a Jeep with a recovering dog and feel understood. Life is strange that way. The messages on my phone kept arriving. I left them unanswered. Not because I wanted revenge. That chapter was already over. The investors leaving wasn't the victory. Audrina losing funding wasn't the victory. The real victory happened much earlier. The moment I stopped asking people to become who they had repeatedly shown me they weren't. That's freedom. not changing them. Accepting reality. And once you accept reality, your decisions become much easier. You stop negotiating with facts. You stop bargaining with disappointment. You stop building your life around the hope that someone else will eventually become different. Instead, you start building your life around what is actually true. That's where peace begins. I reached over and scratched behind Trapper's ear. His eyes stayed closed. His tail moved once. Some relationships drain you. Some relationships steady you. Learning the difference might be one of the most valuable skills a person can develop. And once you learn it, you stop chasing people who make you earn what should have been freely given in the first place. The sun was coming up by the time we reached home. Not the dramatic kind of sunrise you see in movies. Just a pale orange glow slowly pushing through the clouds. The storm had finally moved on. The roads were wet. The trees were covered in fresh snow. And for the first time in what felt like forever, everything was quiet. A few months have passed since the night I carried Trapper out of that blizzard. People often ask what happened afterward. The truth is less exciting than most people expect. There were phone calls, emails, messages, a few attempts to explain things, a few attempts to rewrite history, a few attempts to convince me that I had somehow misunderstood what happened. None of it changed anything. Because once you've seen something clearly, it's very difficult to unsee it. And that's what I want to talk about before this story ends. A lot of people think this story is about a dog. In some ways, it is. Trapper is absolutely the hero of my life. But the older I get, the more I think this story was really about something else. It's about what people are willing to leave out in the cold. Every family eventually answers that question. Not through speeches, not through social media posts, not through holiday cards, through actions. Life eventually puts everyone in situations where they have to decide what matters most. That's where the truth shows up. Sometimes what gets left out in the cold is a person. Sometimes it's loyalty. Sometimes it's honesty. Sometimes it's kindness. Sometimes it's responsibility. And sometimes people don't even realize they're doing it. They become so focused on appearances that they stop protecting what actually matters. I've seen that happen in families. I've seen it happen in businesses. I've seen it happen in friendships. I've even seen it happen in entire communities. People become obsessed with looking successful, looking important, looking impressive. Meanwhile, the people who stood beside them during difficult times slowly disappear. Not because they left, because they stopped being valued. That's a dangerous mistake. One of the biggest mistakes a person can make. Because when life gets hard, and eventually it does, you discover very quickly which relationships are real. The people who truly matter are rarely the loudest people in your life. They're usually the quiet ones, the people who answer the phone, the people who show up, the people who sit with you when there's nothing they can fix, the people who help when nobody is watching, the people who stay. I've learned that loyalty is easy when everything is going well. Everybody wants to stand next to success. Everybody wants to stand next to power. Everybody wants to stand next to money. The real test comes when standing beside someone becomes inconvenient. That's when character shows itself. I think about Trapper sometimes when people ask me what success means. Years ago, I would have answered differently. I probably would have talked about achievement, accomplishments, recognition, titles, the things most of us spend years chasing. Now, I think success is much simpler. Success is walking into a room and knowing exactly who is genuinely happy to see you. Success is having people in your life who don't require you to pretend. Success is being able to tell the truth about who you are without fear of losing your place at the table. Success is peace. And peace is worth more than most people realize. For anyone listening right now who feels trapped in a relationship that constantly makes you question your value, I want you to hear this. You do not need unanimous approval to live a meaningful life. You do not need everyone's understanding. You do not need everyone to agree with your choices. And you certainly do not need to sacrifice your dignity to maintain access to people who refuse to respect it. Protect your peace. Protect your self-respect. Protect the people who have proven they deserve a place in your life. Do that sooner rather than later. Because time is one thing we never get back. If somebody consistently treats your loyalty as disposable, believe them. If somebody repeatedly shows you who they are, believe them. Not because you're angry, not because you're bitter, because reality becomes much easier to navigate once you stop arguing with it. Today, Trapper spends most of his time doing very important work. Sleeps, eating, demanding snacks he absolutely does not need, and occasionally reminding me that he's still convinced he's a lapdog, despite weighing 70 pounds. Some habits never change. Neither does loyalty. When I look back at that night now, I don't think about the investors. I don't think about the mansion. I don't think about the funding deal. I don't even think about Audrina very much. I think about the moment I stopped trying to convince people to value what they had already chosen not to value. That was the real ending. Not the party, not the confrontation, that moment. The moment freedom finally arrived. And if this story has taught us anything, I hope it's this. Don't spend your life chasing acceptance from people who only appreciate you when you're useful. Invest your time in the people who value you when there's nothing to gain. Hold on to the people who stay. Hold on to the people who care. And never leave the right people out in the cold. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every day we share stories about family, resilience, dignity, second chances, and the lessons life teaches when we least expect them. Turn on notifications, join our community, and I'll see you in the next story.